someone who is defining themselves by the diagnosis so that they can have a crutch, so they can use that to get away with A, B, C. Well, I'm in my fourth failed marriage because I'm blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Well, the problem, I can't finish college because I have ADHD. The problem is I can't do this because I got fired from my sixth job because I have bipolar. If you start to see that, then then what you have to address at that point is, yes, like the bipolar is real, you're real, the job is real. What's not real is that you don't believe recovery is real. Because if you did,
Well, welcome everybody to Daydreams Podcast. Today I have a fantastic guest on, Mr. Chad Jones, who has been in the behavioral health industry for what, over 20 plus years, you said?
oh yeah, yeah. Let me count here. It's actually creeping up on 30 because I was in academia before that and another job before I joined Viewpoint Health.
What'd you do in academia?
I was actually the director of student services and academic enrichment and taught psychology courses.
Did you really? Okay,
Yeah,
we'll
yeah,
have to shoot some conversation after this.
yeah. Oh yeah,
I forgot. I didn't know you teach or you taught psychology.
yeah. I did for years and years, and then joined the community service board down in South Georgia, of all places, and then joined Viewpoint Health in 2003. So been to Viewpoint. We're coming up on 23 years.
Gotcha. And you've actually done a lot for Viewpoint. You know, you and
Yeah.
I have been chatting back and forth. And there's a lot of stuff that you do with Viewpoint, particularly around funding. And you guys had a massive win against the Trump administration just a couple months ago, I think, or was it last year? Where you guys were actually fighting for funding in terms of behavioral health.
Yeah. There's been a few things with that, primarily around housing, is what you're referencing. There's been a couple times where some things were getting cut or they changed around the notice of opportunities for funding, they call it. Um, and then we just kind of joined some advocacy groups, put out a lot of notices with different parties throughout Georgia to do advocacy, stayed in contact with federal folks on advocacy around that. But it's been several different things through HUD, through other Department of Community Affairs, housing type things. But yeah, we've had some situations where we've actually been able to put some stuff on hold that from getting cut, as a collective group. And there's some things just personally, just viewpoint that we were able to kind of get paid, I guess you would say, in advance for certain things so that we could at least, uh, you know, carry out the grant. It's not stop immediately kind of thing. So
Yeah.
we've had some wins on that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. Just to back up, I know we mentioned that you've been working in the behavioral health space for what looks like 30 years now, creeping
Mhm.
up on 30 years.
Mhm.
Um, can you tell us a little bit about that? You know, what is mental health? Like, why is it important? And what you currently do in terms of like the legislation side and like how your involvement in that is?
Sure, sure. Yeah, well, so yeah, like you said, coming up on 30 years, obviously mental health has changed a lot over that period of time. Even when I first started, it was if you could see it, the mental health piece of it, you could treat it, and everybody was fine with that. So if you had somebody that was homeless that was walking around, and we've all seen these folks, Dylan, that walk around in big, thick jackets and they're hearing voices and they're mumbling and everything, people are fine to treat that. But back in the day when I first started, everything else was there's such stigma to it. You didn't have mental health centers and stuff that we do in the schools like we're doing now. You didn't have a lot of reentry work where people say, well, they're in jail because of mental health. Let's try to get them out and get them treatment. You didn't have a lot of that. Again, if you could see it, people were fine to treat it. But if it was that unknown stuff of like, is it the mental health that's driving that behavior? Then there wasn't a lot of that stuff back in
Yeah.
those days. And then it started creeping a lot, people doing a lot of research, a lot of research. The Casey Foundation did some amazing research showing the brain of the 25 and younger. That document, I think, even changed Congress' view of this. That document actually was used a lot to promote Obamacare, of saying that you could be on your parents' insurance up to 26, because 25 became the age. Like, like mental health is a big deal, and your brain's not really set until 25, so it's always adapting. And those kind of results came out. People started doing research around reentry, saying folks that actually you can cut down incarceration if you really address the mental health piece of it. So now incarceration goes down, or recidivism, to be incarcerated again, goes down. All this stuff started hitting, and then all of a sudden, next thing you know, you would have these accountability courts pop up, and now people are going to mental health court and drug court and DUI court, and instead of just saying, okay, you got a DUI, Dylan, that's bad. No more DUIs. Well, DUIs are bad, but if you keep getting DUIs, why are you getting DUIs? Why don't we put you in a court that involves treatment? And let's get to the root of this instead of just doing, graduated sanctions or punitive measures on top of your behavior. Let's get to the root of the behavior. So all these accountability courts started happening. We did a veterans accountability court, all that stuff. So you had so much stuff moving on in the criminal justice world, and then the substance abuse world took off. I mean, and I'm not trying to, praise this by any stretch of the imagination, but um, let's be honest, let's be real with each other, Dylan. When the opioid epidemic hit, people started taking notice. When that epidemic hit, and all of a sudden, as your grandmother was hooked on narcotics, OxyContin, and all of a sudden, people like Rush Limbaugh that were national, a lot of these folks, they're big names, all of a sudden are taking time off and going to treatment centers for these things. It became a big deal. And that pushed a lot of legislation, that pushed obviously the settlement agreement from lawsuits, and all of a sudden, and you got a lot of treatment in that. So over the last 30 years, a lot of things have changed to really bring mental health in the forefront of the conversation, which is good. I blended a little bit of my answer over the last 30 years with some of that stuff you said about legislative. The Georgia is by far one of the strongest states when it comes to mental health. I could tell you there are very, very few times where both sides of the aisle and both parties agree. So you got you get something that's bipartisan, meaning both parties, or bicameral, meaning both sides, Senate and legislative. So that's bicameral. When both chambers agree and both sides agree, that is extremely rare. Um, and it's almost impossible to get it unanimous. And in the last few years, Georgia has done that a couple times where they unanimously, that means not one person voted nay, not one. And that was House Bill 1013, which was the Mental Health Parity Act of 2022. It took the Obama parity and actually put more teeth to it statewide in terms of parity. And it brought in assisted outpatient treatment. It brought in multi-agency treatment for children. It brought in parity laws relation to payment of rates, meaning so if you go to your nurse at Piedmont Healthcare, that nurse is going to get paid the same as the nurse at Viewpoint Health. That rate should be equal. They're both nurses. But because one's doing physical health, that rate was here. Oh, and if you're a nurse doing behavioral health assessment, that rate was here. Now they're parity. That's huge. That was unanimous decision. They also did Senate Bill 403, which was the Peace Officer Co-Responder Act. That was unanimous, meaning we're going to support law enforcement by putting a behavioral health clinician with a law enforcement officer to bring mental health to the point of attack, meaning the minute there's something that goes wrong that causes a charge, you call mental health. You don't arrest them and get mental health at the jail. You get mental health on the street with a cop. So that's huge. That's a unanimous decision. So legislative Georgia is very strong in mental health. We've had a lot of good things, and a lot of good things I just mentioned over the last 30 years.
Yeah, I did want to ask. I mean, you've mentioned, that it's kind of evolved over the years, where we have these mental health courts now, substance abuse courts, and like identifying the root problem. So what do you think changed like to make that progress?
I think
Why is it
the
so unanimous now? Like, why are we not? I mean, you can find
right,
any topic right now that people are fighting over.
but not mental health.
Literally,
That's right.
people, both sides will fight over whether or not the color of the sky is blue or
That's
gray. It doesn't
exactly
matter.
right.
So, why is everybody so unanimous on this, and what's making that progress?
You're 100% right. People are seemingly unanimous on this topic, and I think it's a bunch of things. All right. Number one, I think that as people in the early days started attacking stigma related to mental health was like, shh, don't say anything. And there are still cultures that do that, Dylan. There's still folks that no, we'll deal with that at home. It's okay. Soon as people kind of started understanding like it's okay, they started doing amazing podcasts like yours. This is a great podcast. They started doing amazing, these public service announcements like, hey, talk to your friends, check in with them. Soon as it became okay to talk about it, that was one. That stigma piece is huge. Number two, once that opens up the conversation and you start asking friends and family, hey, how are you doing? Everything. Well, guess what happens? You realize that you have somebody in your family that is impacted with a mental health disability or associated disability. We all do, all of us. And all of a sudden it becomes real. When that family thing hits, like it's not just some guy sitting in Nebraska who has XYZ diagnosis. It's my cousin who lives in the same county as me, that kind of thing. When it hits family, it becomes real. Third, for Georgia, now this is for Georgia. Now this did affect the United States, but it was the home of it is Georgia, is the Olmstead Act. Olmstead Olmstead was groundbreaking legislation that was brought in Georgia, made it all the way to the Supreme Court. And Olmstead basically said you have to serve folks with mental health disability in the least restrictive environment. To give you what I have been told by the Olmstead attorneys, who I'm friends with one of them still now, um, it was brought by Georgia Advocacy Office and Atlanta Legal Aid. Atlanta Legal Aid was the primary prosecutor, or the arguer, if you will. At the Supreme Court, there's really not a prosecution defense, so you know how that goes, Dylan. But they were the main presenter of the evidence was Atlanta Legal Aid at the Supreme Court. They have told me, and I've seen this in writing, that Olmstead was the Brown versus Board of Education. So you've heard of Brown versus Board of Education. We all grew up knowing about Brown v. Board of Ed. Olmstead was the Brown versus Board of Education for mental health, and Georgia was the home of it. So it pushed out a lot in terms of, no, we got to redefine how we see mental health. These folks don't need to be locked in a state hospital their whole life. They need to. That's wrong. They need to be in a least restrictive environment. We started bringing in people in the community. Like, let's try to provide community services. So you had breaking down stigma. We all got involved in it because we all knew somebody in it over the years. That piece helps, the familial piece to it. And then third, we had the legislation with Olmstead. Olmstead did a lot to push some of these services.
And when about did Homestead?
It's Olmstead, Olm.
Olmstead.
Olmstead. Yeah, Olmstead. Early 2000s.
Early 2000s. And you believe that that's.
Oh yeah, it was a pillar legislation. Yeah. Matter of fact, since we're talking Georgia, and I know your podcast has a larger reach than Georgia, but Georgia still is in our 16th year of a Department of Behavioral Health settlement agreement with the Department of Justice. We got into that agreement with the Department of Justice because we were violating Olmstead. And even the Department of Justice said, you're the home of Olmstead. You're the home of it. And you're violating it. So we're going to have an agreement with you guys. So they're close to getting out of it. They're very close to getting out of that agreement. But all that was related to Olmstead. So it's big. It was a big, big piece of legislation. And then, Dylan, I guess fourth to that, I mentioned, just to recap, breaking down stigma, the familial piece that we all have somebody involved in it. It touches our heart, touches our home. The legislation piece, that was huge. But I think fourth, goodness and that good feelings, good begets good. Not to copy some of the famous coaches out there like Bear Bryant. I'm University of Georgia, so go Dogs, but Bear Bryant, was Alabama. He said winning is contagious. So winning begets winning. So the thing is, when you go in there and you have some wins where both sides, Republicans and Democrats, are agreeing, and it worked, they want to keep doing it. And a perfect example of this is the opioid agreement, the opioid settlement. The first one honestly, one of the first politicians to ever say that we're in an opioid epidemic was Trump. And people hated him, but they all agreed we are an opioid epidemic. Everybody agreed to that. So they kind of congealed and came together saying, look, we need to go after this and offer more treatment. And they still do to this day. Both sides of the aisle will offer treatment. So I think it really comes down to those four things.
Thank you for recapping that because I actually didn't know that. So that was a big eye opener for me and a little bit of education lesson for me. Now, I think one of the major criticisms when we talk about, healthcare or including mental health care is we get this public funding aspect and people don't really want to pay taxes on this. And could you articulate for us in any way, shape, or form that you could, the benefits of this preventative care and like getting out in front of it before it actually makes it into the judicial system, like somebody getting arrested or something, and then paying more on top of that to have them incarcerated and paying all that. Could you talk about that
Yeah,
at all?
yeah, sure. So the analogy I use in that regard, Dylan, when folks have asked me this over the years, is think about it like when you go to the kids' parties and they got those long balloons that are filled with air and they're doing the balloon
Yeah.
animals and everything, right? So if you took one of those balloons, right, and you said, okay, this is the standard. On this end over here, on my left hand right here is incarceration. That's jail. So that's your jail cost, all that stuff right here, the law enforcement cost, you know, the courts cost. And over here is treatment cost. Okay, this is what we're going to pay for treatment. All right. If you cut this, it goes somewhere. It doesn't just dissipate. It doesn't disappear. So if you say, no, we're not going to do treatment, or you know what, we're not going to provide any more housing for those folks and everything. Well, they don't wake up well overnight just because they read in the headlines. Oh, USA Today headline said no more housing for homeless with mental health folks. All right, you can do it. You can do that. But once you squeeze that, that air is going to go some way. So it's going to have more people are going to be homeless. More people are going to be on the streets. If
Right.
more people on the streets, guess what? Your loitering charges go up, your solicitation charges go up, or whatever goes. So, you have more people in jail. So I tell people all the time, you got $100, right? You can do $25 to treatment, $25 here, $25. That's fine. But if you cut that money out of treatment, all you're going to do is shift dollars to the jail. That's it. Now you're going to have to hire more people to man the jails and more people to sweep streets because people are homeless or things like that. So the best thing to do, and that's what we have done, is to actually go the other way with the funding, is to say, you know what we're going to do is we're going to introduce more mental health programs that can help this do reentry, those accountability courts. We're going to actually tie in crisis respite apartments like we do now with folks getting people into an apartment situation that have a behavioral health diagnosis that are homeless and wrap services around them. We're going to do that wraparound approach. So you're shifting dollars. So you're squeezing this into the balloon and putting up treatment over here. Um, at the end of the day, hands down, 100%. There are so much research about this. At the end of the day, treatment costs you less as a taxpayer than sending someone through the court, through an emergency department, you know, doing all that stuff. The emergency department, the courts, paying those judges' salaries. Let's be
Yeah.
real. Going to jail, sitting in jail for 6 months, and they may be sitting there 6, 7 months. And if they're incompetent to stand trial, Dylan, some of these folks are incompetent to stand trial. We have some folks that are incompetent to stand trial that'll be there for years. So you're paying years of three hots and a cot kind of thing, or sitting at a state hospital paying. It's much easier. It's much easier. It's cheaper from a taxpayer perspective just to provide the treatment.
Do you have data on, how quickly we can help provide treatment on or?
Oh yeah, there's I mean and your listeners you can Google that.
Yeah.
You can the best way to do it, probably the quickest resource is they put out a lot of handbooks and a lot of stuff around this are two things. Number one, you want to go to the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, ASMHSA. Go to their website. You can see data to your heart's content. And even richer data that actually drives the point home is the National Council of Mental Well-being. The National Council was started by Obama, started the National Council, and used to be called the National Council of Behavioral Health, Mental Health. They've changed their name to the National Council of Mental Well-being. But if you go to their website, again, you can see outcome data after outcome data, all that stuff. So yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, this brings home a good point. When we're talking about the relationship between incarceration, homelessness, treatment and services. How does someone like you or me suffering from a mental health disorder, maybe it's substance abuse, maybe it's some other mental health disorder, how do they advocate for themselves? Like, what can they do?
Yeah, I think that is key. And it is, it's the old cliche of you can attract more bees with honey.
You can what? Sorry, I
You,
can't hear.
you can attract more bees with honey.
Yeah.
So when you do advocate for yourself, we encourage it all the time. We always encourage that. We say all the time, advocate for yourself, this and other. But don't get lost in your emotions and be diplomatic. And it is most crucial. It is most crucial to be diplomatic and don't get led by your emotions when you're advocating for yourself. If you are already in a hospital setting, if you are in court, those kind of settings. It's different if you were on a podcast like this and you're advocating for yourself and you start talking and getting, boisterous and led by emotions. You may even have a crowd behind you cheering. Yeah, go, Dylan, do it. But when you're in certain settings like that, you can't lose your diplomacy, because what's going to happen is the minute you get led by emotions and you have a diagnosis, I'm going to be real with you, Dylan. A lot of people will say, "Oh, is Dylan about to have a breakdown?" You follow me? And
Yeah.
once that happens, you've opened that door. So always advocate for yourself, speak the truth, speak clearly, be diplomatic, never ever lose your yes sirs, yes ma'ams. Hey, I'll look into that. Never lose that diplomacy piece. But don't be led by emotion. But we love people to advocate for themselves, and we have tons of programs in the school systems. Of course, I mentioned jails and courts. Um, we're always telling folks to advocate for yourself, and let them know, hey, I'm having a mental health situation, but
Yeah.
don't be led by it. Be diplomatic, that kind of thing. You don't want to make it worse for yourself.
Well, that's a good segue. And that's a good point because you mentioned before the call that recovery is real
Mm.
and that people shouldn't be defined by their diagnosis. It's okay to have a diagnosis, but don't define yourself by a diagnosis. And I like what you're saying because you do have to somewhat be diplomatic. And the second you get a diagnosis, right, some people get all attached to it and get emotional about it. And so I liked what you were saying before about how it's okay to have a diagnosis, but don't let it define you. Could you talk a little bit more
Mm.
about that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, when just the question like you brought it in is, I mean, that's well said. I mean, that's basically, what it is that, look, we all have issues, challenges, whatever. Some are physical, some are mental, right? But if you were fighting for recovery, for instance, of you and our guys, so uh, I'll use guy stuff here and say, well, you and I are fighting for our recovery with prostate cancer, for instance, right? You're still Dylan. You don't want to introduce yourself and say, hey, I'm prostate cancer. How are you doing? Good to meet you. Now, are you ashamed of it? Of course not. Do you have people praying for you? Of course. Pray on. Or you got people in your corner asking about it? Yeah, do that. I mean, are you going to advocate for yourself to get the best care you can? Of course. That's great. But being defined by it is when you have a bad day, um, you you still take ownership of yourself. You don't get defined by saying everything becomes prostate cancer, you know.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's what I mean. If you're in certain situations and settings and you have a diagnosis, let's say like bipolar, where you go from mania, hypermania to depression, and you're in certain settings where you may advocate for yourself. And if someone knows you have that diagnosis, and if you get too led by that emotion, then that group may think, oh, well, here goes Dylan's bipolar again. That's
Right.
what I mean. You don't want to be defined by that, and you don't want to allow that to happen. Um, and that's true of not only the individual basis, but also the system. And one of the examples I've given for years and years when I've done presentations about how the system itself, not just individuals, but the system can change, is around our language and how we say things. Um, and that's how we can change as providers, as practitioners. Words matter. So we can't define people by their thing. So we can't say, well, Dylan's schizophrenic. We don't talk like that. We say, hey, Dylan's a great guy and he happens to have schizophrenia. That's a completely different sentence than Dylan's schizophrenic.
Right.
Um, so no, Dylan's a Georgian. He's a Georgian who happens to have, whatever you fill in the label there. Oh, he's a Georgian. He's a guy. He's married. That kind of thing. But he's a great husband. You can say all that stuff, but you don't define people by saying, well, schizophrenic. So language matters. I learned that from a very powerful mom that actually was advocating. And again, very diplomatic, wasn't led by emotion. She did it the right way. I was giving a presentation, Dylan, probably at this point, probably 22 years ago. And we were of all places, we rented the back of a pizza restaurant, of all places. We're having a big meeting and a lot of advocates were there. And she caught me in the parking lot and she said, Mr. Chad, everybody loves your presentation. You're a good speaker. She said all the nice things that you would imagine. She said, but I have to take issue with one thing you said. And I said, oh yeah, what's that? And she's the one that first taught me that words matter, Dylan. Language matters. She said, I've grown up my whole life and I hear all the time about this program called case management. She said, I hate that term, case management. And I said, oh, okay, well, good. Because that's what I called it too, Dylan. I said, hey, we're case managers. And she said, I'm not a case and I don't need to be managed. And she and I sat there in the parking lot of that pizza restaurant. And I said, I will give you my word. I will never use the term case manager again. And she and I wordsmithed names. And I said, what we're going to do, and she threw out some names. I threw out the names that she and I landed on a term called care coordinator. We're not managing your case. We're coordinating with you on your care. We're partnering with you on your care. Do you know to this day, been here 23 years, we still use those terms in the programs that I oversee. We call them care coordinators, connection
Oh, yeah.
coordinators, care coordinators, it's housing support coordinators. We use the word coordinator. We don't use case manager. So that's what I'm giving that as example to your audience. So that's what language matters is she advocated for herself. Words matter. We have to change the system, and that system still changed 22 years ago.
Yeah, and I have to agree with you. I really do think that words matter. And the example that I give to some students is, the criticism is why should we worry about our words? Why should we self-censor? Why should we care, about what we're saying? If it's the term that's being used, then that's just the term that's being used. But I agree with you. And my pushback to that is there's a very big difference in using a simple change of articles like the and a. Like, grammatically or syntactically, they're amongst the same class
Mm-hmm.
articles, right? But there's a big difference in saying I am a man versus I am the man.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Very simple difference, but one word is changed. I am the man puts me at the center, right? I am
Yeah.
the man, like it's more triumphant versus I am a man, which is like I'm just amongst the crowd. And so that's why I believe, even though there's not really much emotion in that example, it
Right.
still highlights the power and the use of language and what you're trying to say. And that's why when people are arguing with me about like, hey, why should we not use this word? Why can't we not use that word anymore? Well, because
Mm-hmm.
maybe it has a stigma to it now. And what it means now is not what it meant 50 years ago. It
That's
means
right. That's exactly
something
right.
different. So I have to completely agree with you on use of language and use of
Mm-hmm.
terminology. Though I will, in my own experience, going back to that recovery is real and not defining yourself by your definition, I have personally seen people where once they have gotten a label, like something like ADHD or something like that, that has become them. That is now their personality. And not so much so like it's a bad thing, but when you talk to them and there's any sort of misbehavior or misdirection, or maybe they mess up, they blame it on their disorder.
Mm.
And so I want to also be wary and tread lightly when I use terminology and say, yes, we shouldn't define people on both ends of the spectrum by their diagnosis. You should not define yourself by your diagnosis, nor should I, right?
Right. Right.
So that's
And
how
I
I
think
feel.
that's the, I think that's a great segue into kind of part two of the recovery is real discussion, because here's the thing. That first discussion we just had is around individuals advocating, of course, the practitioners, providers having to change their language and understanding that piece. Now, if you truly buy into recovery is real, what does that mean? That means that you think one day you're going to recover.
Right.
That Dylan, one day I used the health example of you and I being men with prostate cancer. That guess what? One day we're going to say, what do we all say? They ring the bell, they give you a little badge, and you say, "Oh, you're a cancer survivor."
Survivor.
Everybody says it, right? Cancer, and that's the goal.
Right.
So we have addressed that before on a provider practitioner level. Is if you see someone who is defining themselves by the diagnosis so that they can have a crutch, so they can use that to get away with A, B, C. Well, I'm in my fourth failed marriage because I'm blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Well, the problem, I can't finish college because I have ADHD. The problem is I can't do this because I have, I got fired from my sixth job because I have bipolar. If you start to see that, then that's that. Then what you have to address at that point is yes, like the bipolar is real, you're real, the job is real. What's not real is that you don't believe recovery is real. Because if
Wow.
you did, you would want to get over that. You would stop
Yeah.
using that as your excuse. You would basically want to be, you'd want to wear that badge one day and say, I'm a cancer survivor. Everybody wants to be a cancer survivor. Well,
Absolutely.
everybody doesn't want to get it to begin with, but if you get it, you want to be a cancer survivor. So that's what I say to that is people that start to use that diagnosis as a crutch. Um, and honestly, part of that crutch, Dylan, to be real with you, is we see this a lot with kids that get diagnosed. As they get out and they start to recover, and they get a job, and next thing you know, oh my God, now they got a significant other. It's almost Linus with that blanket. That blanket that they've had has been their thing, man. That whatever it is, they took medication for 8 years, man. That's been my thing, and now I got to let go of my thing. Um, and they may believe recovery is real, but they may have their own anxiety about let go of my thing. And I've talked to several families that they've gotten folks off medication, and we're going to try a holistic way, a different way of doing it. Um, so I mean, it's that recovery is real is really both sides of that.
Yeah, that's powerful. I mean, when you said they don't believe recovery is real, that's power behind that. Geez, I really I didn't think about that like that. Like if you're truly saying that I am my diagnosis, I am defined by my diagnosis, and you're using it more as a crutch,
Right,
like this is why my marriage failed, this is why I didn't get my job, or I'm on my sixth job, then you don't believe recovery is real, and that's
right.
huge. And that's what I want to clarify here, because a lot of times I see on social media that a lot of people they speak with that language as if they don't believe recovery is real, and they act like there is no such thing as recovery. You are your diagnosis. Once you get it, it's like a terminal illness. You have it for
Mm.
life. And it's like that's not how it works, guys. It's just not.
Right. Yeah.
And it blows my mind to see people discussing it online. And they say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I
Right,
feel
right,
like it
right,
is good intentions when people come out like this, because most of the time it's in a advocate sort of way or an awareness scenario where people are advocating for these mental health disorders, bipolar disorder, ADHD, depression, schizophrenia, all these types of things. But then they don't mention the recovery aspect.
Mm. Right, right.
So I find
And
that very
and
interesting.
and I think a lot of it is too, you have to be careful of what type of diagnoses you're talking about.
Right.
So let me be really, really clear. A dysthymic disorder, a ADHD thing, those kinds of level of things um, are completely different than someone being genetically predisposed to one of the four main types of schizophrenia.
Yeah.
They will, that individual, that recovery is real for them, but it still may be different, meaning it is like having the type 1 diabetes where you're on your pancreas does not work. And until they come up with a new pancreas that can go in your body with type 1 diabetes, guess what? You're gonna be on a shot or a pill for the rest of your life. That level of schizophrenia is the same way. We're not suggesting that recovery is real, they got to come off medication. It's just what does recovery look like for them now?
It's personalized.
Yeah, it's personalized. They could still be on medication. Guess what? You can still work. Guess what? You can still get married. You can have kids, and your kids can never even get it. So that life is still happening. It's real, but it's not. When we say recovery, it's not like, well, I'm cured now. I never have to. It's not the flu. I'm cured now, and I never have to worry about it again. Um, but there are some disorders that if you change diet, if you change circumstances, if you change your thought patterns of how you see things, we do things called like cognitive behavioral therapy, motivational interviewing, changing those thoughts around and how you see
Yeah.
those things, different rational emotive therapy. How do you change those rational thoughts, those irrational things that are creating those emotions? How do you make them more rational now? If you do that over time, then there's a lot of disorder, including depression, that can be flat out recovered. You're done. Like, check your box. There's some, Dylan, that are biochemical and genetic predispositions. So you think of it like type 1 diabetes. You're gonna have it. You're gonna have it.
Yeah, and I'm glad you made that distinction.
Yeah. I just didn't want any of your listeners to listen and say, "Oh, they're over here talking about, hey, you can
No.
recover." Like, recovery is personalized. I like your word when you say personalized. It's personalized for everybody on every situation, but you still don't say, "Well, I hear things and I say things and I this thing, and therefore I don't have to have accessible marriage. I don't have to work.
Yeah.
I don't have to listen to people because of my thing." Yeah, you still do.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I told you this, but I did work at um, a behavioral health clinic. When was it? Back in 2018.
Oh
And
yeah,
so I was a behavioral health tech in a behavioral health clinic. And so I got to see some of those up close and personal. And I was on the
yeah,
intensive unit
yeah,
sometimes, the ones where they lock you down. And
yeah.
so that was a really good experience, I think, for me, because I got to see a wide range of disorders that were, like you said, genetically predisposed, and disorders where people were coming in and, treating things such as depression, like major episodes of
Right, right.
like major, like suicidal episodes of depression, all the way up to some other mental health disorders that I don't know if Viewpoint Health treats, but more of the geriatric side, like Alzheimer's and dementia. So I got to see a wide range of mental health,
Right, right.
and it was very interesting. But it was also really interesting to see the strategies that they use to help with some of these disorders. Like cognitive behavioral therapy was one of them. Music therapy was a big one.
Right. We do that. We've done art therapy, of course, equine therapy. So
But you know what? You know what I found super interesting, Chad?
what's that?
My entire time I was there, deliberately not naming the place.
Right. Okay. Let's do it.
My entire time I was there, not once did we take the clients outside.
Oh wow. Yeah.
And there was a yard for it. There was a fenced in, gate in yard,
Hmm.
and everything was on lockdown. I'm sorry, we took them out one time, one
Right.
time.
Okay. Okay.
But you're talking a mental health hospital, and these people are here for 2 weeks on average,
Hmm.
sometimes, and not a day of sunlight outside. For
Mm.
anybody, I feel like that would make it
Oh
worse.
yeah, that would that most certainly would.
Like, I mean, for
Yeah.
me, like if I went in there because I had depression and you locked me up
Hmm.
and I can't go outside, I can't do anything, I'm just in this room and I have to go back and forth between the lobby area and my own room, that would mess me up. That'd mess
Yeah.
me up more.
Yeah, that's why one thing I really do appreciate about everything that we do at Viewpoint Health, and there's a lot of providers across the country that do what we do, but we are really focused a lot on what a process that we call meaningful day. And it is a coined phrase to have a meaningful day, meaning that people are in our group homes, people that live with us in our group homes or any of our properties and all those programs, um, when they get up, going to some day program for treatment, but also going on outings, going to jobs, helping them get
Oh,
jobs.
that's
We actually even go to
yeah.
vacations. We actually we've done out of state trips
Hmm.
with our clubhouses and our programs. We've been to the beach before. So you're doing things that like they think that population can never get. Like you said, the whole being in the hospital in those fluorescent lights and everything. I really do appreciate what we've always done at Viewpoint to really get out and make sure that everybody has a meaningful day.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's important. I think that's
yeah,
so rated.
yeah. It goes huge. That is a huge thing for mental health, and that's something, Dylan, to kind of tie this back to your first question about what I have seen over the 30 years, and I gave some examples and everything. That's kind of one of the pockets that we're in now. A lot of growth in this pocket that we're in now about things in recovery are more important than your doctor, your medication, your vital signs with your nurse and your counselor. Um, and you've seen a big push of that in the last 7, 8 years, even pre-pandemic, but the COVID pandemic definitely pushed it forward, and that is called SDOH, and it's an acronym that means Social Determinants of Health. And at Viewpoint, I've actually written several SDOH grants before. We've actually received grants, but it's looking at those things of what is nutrition, what is your housing situation like, what's your employment, your that whole meaningful day thing. What does your social interactions look like? It's all those things that come together to say these are your social determinants of health. It's not just take the pill and sit in your mom's basement and behave. It's look, get out, get to meet people. Go to what's your faith-based stuff looking like? What you got to get out and let's get a job. So you're seeing more of that push has happened over the last few years as well of really focusing on the social determinants of health.
Do you notice things like being productive and having a community actually benefit?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And what's neat about SDOH is it's definitely part of the parity approach because even physical healthcare, primary care, talk about SDOH. So they talk about it all the time. So
Yeah.
even they'll say even if you have a physical diagnosis of something, a physical ailment, just getting out, laughing, being with people, getting out that sunshine you mentioned. That they'll say, oh, vitamin D. We may not in mental health, we may not call it vitamin D. We just may say it's good for the soul, good for the but all that stuff. So you see both sides, the primary care, the physical care, and mental health, are all of them push social determinants of health.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chad. Are there any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I think just to always remind folks that check in with yourself. That's called introspection. Always take that moment where you check in with yourself. How am I feeling today? What it was one of my process and this and another. Check in with your family and your friends. I can't tell you, Dylan. We all know those stories that we say, so and so, this happened with them, whether it be a suicide attempt or something like that. And they'll say, everybody says the same story. I never saw it coming. I never knew he or she had a problem ever. So I think just advocating for yourself in that, checking in with yourself, advocating for your family and your friends and checking in with them is crucial. So anytime I'm giving a little, um, I won't call it a speech, but anytime we're having a conversation like this and someone says, any final thoughts? I always want to close with that. Make sure people are always checking in on yourself, checking in with your friends and family.
Those are fantastic final thoughts.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Chad. Do you have anywhere people can find you?
Yeah. So I was just about to say, I'll put it in the chat.
Well, if you want to send it to
for
me, if
for
you want to send it to
for
me,
the
I can
for the
add it to
po-
the
put it in
description.
the chat for a podcast, but it's
Yeah.
just Chad. It's just Chad. Chad, Chad. dot Jones, Jones at VP for Viewpoint, VP Health, HEALTH Chad.Jones at VPHealth.org.
Awesome, possum. Well,
We'll
thank you,
do it, man.
Jones. It has been fantastic speaking with you. And again, everybody, this has been Daydreams Podcast. Thank you again. Have a great evening.
All
Bye.
right. Thank y'all.